All right. What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Chris Theodat. Today we're gonna do something a little different than we're normally used to. I have a friend of mine. We're gonna talk some politics, some local politics, but we're gonna talk some politics. So I don't have a name for the segment yet, but when we do, I'm gonna tell you. But this segment is brought to you by the Link Media and powered by the Zoom app. So everybody, say hi to my good friend Danielle. Say hi, Danielle.
Hi, everybody.
Danielle's a friend of mine who is an educator in the Boston School Network, and we're going to talk about question 2. It's a week before the elections, and I personally want to know what question 2 is. How does it work? What are the pros and cons? And hopefully we can answer a bunch of other questions we have, because Danielle right now is our resident expert. So thank you for.
I'll try my best.
Thank you for being our expert. I appreciate you. And let's get right into it. First of all, Danny, tell us a little about yourself.
Yes, as Chris mentioned, my name is Danielle Blair. I am an assistant principal at a charter school here in Boston, and very passionate about education, and just excited to talk about what question number 2 would mean. I grew up in Boston, went to Boston Public Schools up until 5th grade. My mom put me in the MECO program. And I went to college, went away to Atlanta, came back, and decided to be in the classroom. Taught in Atlanta for 2 years, and then I also taught in the classroom for another 4 or 5 years after that. And so I'm an auntie now, and my nephew was fortunate enough to get into a charter school I work at, actually. And he also was accepted into MECO. So we were lucky enough to be able to have the chance to have 2 options that we thought were really great, because my sister knew that he didn't want him to attend the traditional district schools in Boston, just based off of our experience when we were kids there. And I wanted to make sure that my nephew had the best education possible, and she just knew as a parent that the school that you choose makes a big difference in the trajectory of a child's life. So that's just a little bit of background about me and my passion and what kind of stakes I have.
Awesome. And this is why Danny is our expert. All right. So first of all, what is question 2?
So question number 2, if there is a vote yes for number 2, basically question number 2 would give the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education the authority to lift the cap, which would allow 12 new charters to expand, that are already in existence, or start 12 new charter schools. So basically right now in Boston, there are lots of different type of schools. You have public schools that we call district schools. So that's your traditional, like the Lee School, the Burke, the schools you're familiar with. There are exam schools like, Latin Academy and Latin and the O'Brien that you're familiar with. And there are also charter schools. And those schools, started when the law was passed in 1993 for those schools to exist. And so basically right now, no more than 120 charter schools are allowed to exist in Massachusetts at the moment. And so what this vote would do would allow for there to be more charter schools that are able to come into existence. So it would give the board that power to open more schools is the short version.
Gotcha. All right. So I think the big issue is, funding and funding the charter schools versus traditional public schools. How are these schools funded, charter and traditional public?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because I think there's a lot of confusion about how exactly the funding works. But the way that funding works for schools is that the government decides, based off this really intricate formula, how much the school system should be allotted. And it's based off of a number of things. I actually had some notes here where I wrote it down because I know it's definitely based off of like, transportation, the student need, or some of those other things I wrote down. Let me see if I had the notes here. I'll see if I can find them in a second, but it's based off of the students' needs, like if they have special education services. It's based off of like, if they need like speech or other things to help support the student, if they need to hire a psychologist. And so they take in the economic background of the students and they determine what the needs are by student. So each school is funded per pupil. So money is allotted by each student. So if you have more students, ideas that you're going to need more money for these students. If there are less students, the price is also determined that way. And then, as I said earlier, it's also based off of need. So, you have this funding per pupil. And I think what the big, argument that is being circulated right now is that if more charter schools are allowed to open with this, with this new ballot question, that it's going to take away money from the Boston public school system. Right. And so I think, it's important to know how the funding works and that it's by student. And I think a lot of people are talking about, it's taking money away from BPS, but we have to, refocus the conversation and notice that it's money per student. It's not BPS's money, it's the student's money, right? And so if the money is allocated per student, that money should follow where the student is going. So whether the student is going to a Boston public school, whether the student is going to an exam school, whether a student is going to a charter school, the money should follow them. So I think when you look at it from that perspective, it's not taking away money from the Boston public school system because the money is the children's money and the money is there for them and should go with them. I think the other thing that's important to know about the funding, this is very unique to Massachusetts actually, because this doesn't happen in other states, is that when a student leaves a Boston public school, a district school, and they go to a charter school, the Boston public school system is paid a percentage, they're reimbursed a percentage for that student that's in charter schools for up to 5 years. So, not only, the student is not there physically, and I would argue if the student's not there physically, you don't need the money for that student because you're not educating them. But, to lessen the blow of the transition, Massachusetts has come up with this reimbursement program to make sure that the Boston public school system is getting that money reimbursed. So I think those are, some of the big arguments. And I mean, I have obviously a lot more to say. But I think, the other thing to think about is, just BPS taking a look at how many students they're educating. So, I mean, obviously they're educating more than the number I'm about to throw out, but just to keep it simple, let's say like BPS in 1993 was educating 100 students.
Right.
At this point, since charters have been around, now let's say they're serving 80 students.
Right.
But they still have the same number of buildings allotted for 100 students when now they're only serving 80. So they say, well, the money is paid per student and the students leave, but we still have to pay for the building. We still have light bill. So even though those students aren't there, they're arguing, okay, well, we still have these bills. But I always, use this analogy, when, your parents have kids. Let's say, back in the day, they was having like 5 and 7 kids, right?
Right.
You need a big house to accommodate all those children. Well, once the kids grow up and get older, go off to college, they start having their own families. A lot of times what parents do is they downsize, right? That's just enough for the person and their spouse because they only have 2 people living there now. You don't need a house big enough for 7. So I think
unless you just want a big house because it's my big house.
Right, but then that means you must have the money to pay all those bills, right? So I think that is part of the issue, and that's generally my response to that argument that people say like, oh well, we still have light bills, we still have all these buildings. Well, now that you're not serving the same number of students, BPS needs to consider how they're going to consolidate and make sure that they're using their money as efficiently as possible.
All right. Do you have a median figure of how much the students get or per student, how much BPS gets per student?
Yeah, so I looked up that figure and the numbers kind of shifted depending on where I looked. I know my school shared some data with me and then I went online And the last figure that I saw was around 16,000 per student.
Wow.
Oh, and here are my notes here. That formula that we talked about earlier, it considers emotional impairment, the amount of ELL students, poverty levels, and students with disabilities. Those are some of the things that formula that the government uses to come up with that figure of about 16 grand per student.
Okay. So now we hear the commercials, right? You know, say yes to question 2, say no to question 2. Now, when those commercials come on and they're talking about, you know, it takes funding away from traditional public schools, you know, what did it say, 400 million in Massachusetts alone? Is that 400 million, are they students? Is that what they're talking about?
Is that for students? Yeah. You know, I don't know exactly how they came up with that figure, but I believe that's probably what they figured out in terms of like, you know, how many students would be leaving and then multiplying that by how much you pay per pupil.
Right.
So that's probably how they came up with that figure. Yeah.
Okay. Now, in your, you know, assessment, what are the pros and cons of question 2?
Yeah, and so this is tricky, right? Because like obviously I'm biased here, so it's going to be hard for me to come up with cons. And I actually, you know, sat down and really thought about this a lot. But I think the pros is definitely that there are more choices for students in Boston, you know, for our Black and our brown children, our children of color. As I said, my nephew was very fortunate to have the option between MECO, you know, going to school out in Brookline, being bused off there, and then also.
Uh-oh. Did I lose you?
His mom had a choice.
Can you repeat that last part again? I think I lost you in there.
And, you know, I'll never say like a charter school is perfect. I'll never say like a charter school is for everyone because quite honestly, I believe that there's not one type of school in America that serves every type of student. You know, if you have somebody who's really autistic and who's severe on the spectrum, you know, he's not going to be able to go, for example, like to the Burke school necessarily or to, you know, another traditional school. They have independent schools and they have schools that are specially made for students who are autistic because they can serve those students because those students have special needs. So I think that the you know, one big important benefit is to have choice. And that you would be able to have that. I think the other benefit is that, you know, you can't say this actually about all charters in other states, but I think Massachusetts is a very special state where the charters have proven that, you know, they are doing well by our Black and brown students. So we're not only comparing how the students are doing to Boston public schools, but when I was trying to make the decision, my boss actually showed me data on how students of color were doing in Brookline. In our school, along with a number of other charter schools, students of color were outperforming those students in not only BPS, but also in Brookline and Newton and other affluent areas. So I think for me, that data is showing that, you know, we have a bigger issue that we need to, you know, think about in our country, because it's not just how the, you know, low income public schools are doing. It's also in the affluent schools too. How are we educating our Black and brown students? And why is it that even when they go out to the more affluent schools that are supposed to have more resources, that, you know, the Black and brown children are still in all the special ed classes and they're still doing poorly? So the first point I made was that it gives you choice. Second is that there's data to support that the students who are going to charter schools are being educated. So I think those are my two biggest reasons why we should lift the cap. And then the third one would be because parents want it, right? There are, I can't remember what the last figure was. I think it was 4,400 students were on the waiting list to get into charter schools. Within the last 2 months, I've had about 5 parents call me and say, hey, how can I get my students into your school? And so if parents in these communities want the charter schools and they, you know, feel like it's doing right by our kids, they should be able to have that choice. No one should have to go to a certain school just because there's no other schools around or just because of their zip code. So I think those are my 3 biggest reasons. To sum that up again, give parents more choice, the parents want it, and charters are proving to be effective in educating children. And if you have a good school, why not allow for there to be more good schools? My sister asked me the other day, I don't understand, why would anybody want to vote no? Like, she can just see like how much my nephew is growing and how much he's learning, and quite frankly, just wants that for every parent. And in terms of the cons, I don't see cons, and like, I know people argue. I think if anything, it's like made Boston Public Schools better. Like, I feel like when you share best practices, like a lot of the things that the charters are doing, like some of those things the Boston Public Schools are like picking up,
Right.
The district schools, because I want to make sure everybody knows that charter schools are public and district schools are public, because I feel like people try to, make
Separate them.
But honestly, I believe that it would just be good for our students, and that's why that we should push the cap. So I don't have any cons. I'm sorry.
Okay. So what issues do you think need to be?
Oh, your volume went down. I can't hear you.
Oh, did it? Let me. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Uh-oh, what happened?
There we go. Can you hear me?
Barely.
Barely. Barely.
Barely.
Uh-oh. Let me see what we get. Anything? Nothing?
That's better. Right there.
Better? Awesome.
And now you're crooked a little bit, but I don't know if that.
Now I'm all.
Okay, there you go. Oh,
there we go.
yeah.
All right. Now we're back. Yeah, we had a little bit of interference there.
Okay.
All right. So, what are the issues you think need to be addressed in the public schools and the charter schools?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I feel like this could be a 20-minute conversation just for that part itself. But I think, and for both charters and for district schools, I think, I'll speak to charters first. I think that something that charters are still working on is that work-life balance for the teachers.
Right.
That's something that I think is super important, and I think it's important because it affects how they're educating students. I think something else that schools are working on is bridging that gap. If you notice, a lot of times at these charter schools, a lot of the teachers are Caucasian teachers, and they don't necessarily match the ethnicity of the group that they're working with. When a lot of times we're serving, Hispanic and also African American students, and West Indian students, of course. I think that sometimes there's a disconnect there of knowing the background of students and using that as a tool to help push students academically. I think that there's a lot to work on there, and also some background. Like I taught in Atlanta public schools for 2 years, so I do have the background of working in a public district school as well as a charter. And some things that I think that needed to be worked on there is just making sure the people who are in charge are really looking out for the best interests of the students. There's something really wonderful about having leadership when I came to Boston, who had previously taught in the classroom, and they were still very in tune with what the needs of the students and the teachers were, and they weren't just somebody downtown making all those decisions. And I think, that's probably my biggest criticism of like public schools, is that a lot of times you have, people in leadership and people downtown making all these decisions, and they're not the ones who are on the ground every day and able to make the best decisions. I think that, the leadership should be at the school level. The principal, the teachers, the people who are there every day know the best needs for the students. And that might even vary between, campuses or between schools. And they should be the ones making the decisions, who they can hire, who they can fire. Are you familiar with Waiting for Superman?
Yes.
Have you seen the documentary? Okay, so, there's a scene where they talk about, like, a teacher who just reads a newspaper and, he's tenured and he has this salary. That was the teacher next door for me when I was teaching in Atlanta. Like, I was like a first and second year teacher, and he straight up just be reading a newspaper or reading a book. He would come and ask me for my lessons. And mind you, I'm a new teacher, my first and second year. And he was like, yeah, what's your lessons? Like, and I'm just like, don't you need a plan? Like, you're the senior teacher. I should be asking you for help. And he just didn't do work. And I was, thankful that somehow his students learned. Like, he put the book in front of them and let them just read and teach themselves. These are fourth graders.
Right.
But it was like everybody knew that he didn't do work. but he was still there. And I just couldn't understand why somebody who like didn't do work, who's tenured, getting paid, these hefty salaries, was still able to teach. And they just, couldn't get rid of him because of, these really thick contracts that teachers who get tenured get. So I think, that's another something to think about, like just making sure that the right people are in charge and making the decisions that are best on the behalf of the students, and figuring out how to use the budget efficiently. Because, a lot of people argue like, oh, charters are taking away the money. But, we were in school, I'm not trying to tell my age or nothing. Back when I was in school a long time ago, like there were still issues with the budget, and there's still issues now. That was before charters were even around, and VPS was still saying we're having issues with money.
Right.
Charters weren't even around then. So what was the issue with the money then? And I think there's just, not a lot of efficiency there. And I think, when I was looking up figures on like where all the budget is being used, I saw some figures around how most of the money is on like teacher salary, personnel, that type of thing. And I wonder, and obviously, as a teacher, like I think teachers should be paid, but I think teachers should be paid well if they're doing their job and they're doing a good job at their job. And I'm not sure that that's the case. So, there's lots of places where we need to, fix things up. And then just a couple more for charters. I think, at first they didn't have as many students, English language learners. That's that's a number that has increased just recently. I think within the past 2 years, they gave us Boston Public Schools email list so that we could reach out to the same population of students to try to recruit more students to apply. So that was helpful. And also, we want to do better by having more special ed programs. Right now, like the smaller districts, we can serve students who have special needs. But like I mentioned earlier, if there's somebody who's like severely autistic, for example, who is unable to function in a traditional classroom, like we don't have like a school for that, where like how BPS does. And so I know a few teachers who want to just start a charter school that's just dedicated to students who have special needs. So like if we lift the cap, that's something that would be able to happen, so that we have more students who have that same need. If we only have 1 or 2 students who have severe special needs, there's not a whole school for just 3 students. And so that's why they have to go to, some of those independent schools in Boston Public School, if that makes sense. That makes sense? Okay. Yeah, so I think, those are lots of things that needs to be, taken. Right, but I think just as a nation, obviously, just, in America, we have lots of things we need to address. Like, I just don't understand why, a 4th grader in Massachusetts and a 4th grader in Georgia, for example, are learning 2 different things or have 2 different ideas of what rigor is, and like 2 different, capabilities of what they're doing. It just doesn't make sense. It should be equal across the board. They should be, working and getting the same access to the same kind of materials, and that's not happening right now. I just wonder what we're doing as a country. It seems like other countries have it together, but like, what are we doing right now? I'm not quite sure.
Wow.
See, I was trying to make that my short answer.
So Danielle Blair, man.
No, I'm not being else. I'm tired.
All right. So in the advertising, I don't know how much of it you've seen, but what are the accurate things? What are the inaccurate things? What's the straight BS? What's the plausible? Like, what are they telling you that, can be expanded upon?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things that are just not true. So some things that I've heard that are just straight up not true is like, oh, charter schools can kick out students who don't have good grades, like, or who don't perform well. Like, no, that's not true. Like, that's against the law. Like, that just can't happen. The only way a student can get kicked out of a school is under, all the provisions of like expulsion, which is like standard at any school, right? So, I had a student tell me who's at our school right now. I was like, oh, why'd you get expelled from your last school? Oh, I slapped a teacher. Okay, like,
Right.
That's expulsion. So I think that's something that I've heard that's just not true. Some other things that I've heard is that charter schools are private schools. Like they use public money, but they're privately run.
Right.
That doesn't make sense. When Uncle Sam lets you use his money privately to do what you want without having to answer to him? Like, no, it doesn't work like that. So, you know, charter teachers are public employees. The administration, you know, the principals, they're public employees. Now, we do have board of trustees, which can be made up of people who are not public employees. It could be somebody who works at, you know, a random company. But I think the important thing to understand is that everybody answers to the Board of Secondary and Elementary Education, and that they have to answer to them, and we have to abide by the same regulations that every other public school has to. We have to take the same state test. We have to, you know, provide special services for students who need them. I have my little diabetic students who, you know, need their medicine. We have to have a nurse that's able to service them. Like, we have to answer to the same governing body, and those people on that board are elected by, is it our governors or our senators? I don't remember which, if it was the governor or the senator, but they're appointed by people that we elect. You know what I mean? So that whole notion that it's somehow private and that it's for profit and that they're trying to make money off of the kids is just BS. And I have seen a couple of ads on the yes side that have said, you know, go ahead and vote. It won't impact your students. And I don't believe that that's fully true, that doesn't give the full picture, because it will impact BPS. Now, I don't think that, you know, charter schools are the root of the money issue there, but I do believe that if BPS doesn't do more to, you know, do that downsizing that I talked about earlier, where like they, you know, change things. Like, we're not serving as many students because there are more charter schools, and more charter schools are serving the students in Boston. Like, you know, they need to think about that. And if they don't take that into consideration and they keep trying to keep the same number of buildings open with a lot less students, like, that is going to impact their children. So I don't think that that's fully true. I think, because I'm trying to show both sides here and not only
right, yeah.
show the side that I'm for. Because I think the politics of it all has just gotten really nasty. You know, it should be about like the quality of the education that students
for the
are.
kids.
But now all it's about is just money. And that's all people are talking about, is just money, money, money. So I think those are my big things of you know, the truths and the non-truths that are being spewed out there.
Okay. So last question really quickly. What are just a couple key points to remember before voting?
Yeah, I think know how funding works, right? Make sure you get how funding works. I think the other important thing to know is look up stuff. You know what I mean? Do your research. Go on the Boston Public Schools website, go on the Department of Education for Massachusetts, go there, look up information, educate yourself. So one, you know how the funding works. Two, you know what has been done in the past. So something that I found very interesting is that, in 1993, when the legislation was passed for the first like charter to be able to open, like the first one didn't even open in Massachusetts till a year or two after that. And then I looked at like how many people applied for a charter versus how many people were actually allowed to get a charter. And from like 1995, I'd say like 100 people have had applications, 200, and only 100 of them were actually able to be schools. And even of those 100, not even all of those are still like in existence. So to me, that data says to me that one, it's a stringent process in order to even open a charter. Like they have all these different credentials that you have to look at. You can't just be like, Joe on the street, I want to open up a charter. Like you have to have a real plan, show some like innovation and like why you think that your school would work. And then they come and they check you out in your first 5 years of existence. They come check you out after the first 2 years, and then they check you again after, 5 years, and then every 5 years they check. I went on the website right now. I can see what schools of these charter schools are on probation. So like that information is there. So Massachusetts doesn't play. If you're opening up a school and the school sucks, because I'm not going to say all charters are great, right?
Right.
If it's not doing well, it closes down. And so I think that's something else that people are scared about, is that like, oh, if we pass this law, there's going to be like 10 charter schools tomorrow. And like, I don't know how that's going to affect all the kids. So, you know, educate yourself on how funding works. Go to the Boston Public Schools website, Department of Education website, and just remember, like, you know, it's about the kids. Like, everybody's talking about money, but it's about the kids. And just think about your own educational experience and what, you know, are the direct impacts of having more charters or not having more charters. What does that mean for the children in our school systems in the Boston area? And I think if you're just keeping all those things in mind, like, you know, go out there. I, of course, want to vote yes on number 2, but I think you should do what's true to you, whatever you feel like would be the best for our kids, because that's really, you know, what this is all
about. Awesome.
Yeah, that's all right. I
got. No, that's amazing. That's really good, really helpful. Actually helped me a whole lot more than I expected.
Try to be, you know, I just have been trying to be a resource. I get emotionally invested in things. You know, sometimes I have to stop watching football and basketball games because, you know, I get, you know, emotionally invested. This is one of those things. But I've been, you know, trying to be here as a resource if people have questions. You know, not so much on the like debating them to go back and forth, but like if you have questions and then like, you know, if people are saying things that are just downright like not true, I want to make sure that like they have the correct information. Because what I would hate, because it just seems like they're going to people's door. Oh, I'm gonna put this sign in your yard. Say no, they take away money from kids, but people don't have the full picture. So I want to make sure that everybody has the full picture, you know, before they go out and cast their vote.
Awesome. Well, thank you for this. This has been very educational. And I know our viewers are going to be educated and informed of the polls next Tuesday.
Oh, yeah. Or you can vote early. I already cast my vote. Go out and get it done. Don't wait in line.
That is true. Get it done.
Yep.